Welcome to Datagaps webinar. I am Pooja Gupta, Growth Marketing Manager at Datagaps, and I would like to thank you all for joining us today. Before we get started, we have a couple of quick housekeeping comments. First, we have muted all mics to avoid unintended distractions. Next, the chat room is open so that you can interact with us through the chat. And finally, at the end of the session, we will open it up for Q&A. Today in this webinar, we will understand how Datagaps DataOps Suite helps to streamline CI/CD pipelines with testing automation at various levels of data flow under different test plans and environments. We will also share the advantages of using DataOps Suite over DBT for CI/CD pipelines. On the panel today, we have David Small, VP of Sales at Datagaps, and Shubhanshu Dikshit, Product Manager at Datagaps. And here is our agenda for today's webinar. A quick overview of Datagaps and DataOps Suite, followed by how automated testing streamlines CI/CD pipelines for both data and code. Next, we will talk about how Datagaps DataOps Suite rolls out bidirectional plans and test cases. Thereafter, Shubhanshu will share DataOps Suite demo to highlight Datagaps DataOps Suite cloud impact. In the end, we will discuss about real-world case studies and success stories, which will be followed by Q&A session. We have also included a couple of polls, which will reflect in the middle of the session, and we would request every attendee to share their feedback by answering all poll questions, please. And now I hand this over to Dave. Dave, stage is all yours.
All right, thank you, Pooja, and thanks everyone for joining the seminar and the webinar. Greatly appreciated. Now, of course, you can't have a webinar without some quotes and information from advisory services, right? So this particular advisory services really put together the attributes, the 5 attributes that they believe any data ops implementation should at least have. They start with data pipeline orchestration to monitor existing and create new pipelines and a variety of things. They also include data pipeline observability to be able to observe the data as it flows through the pipeline and potentially even learn about that data and identify outliers as potential anomalies. They also think one of the attributes is data pipeline deployment automation. So through versioning control, through integration with Git and a variety of things like that, that really help improve your release cycles and make for more of an agile type of deployment. They believe that data pipeline test automation is a critical part of that, and being able to actually not just have your ETL processes, your codes, your programs and such in the CI/CD pipeline, but also integrate automated tests within those CI/CD pipelines, really to streamline the testing and find things earlier. And then finally, environment management, the ability to bring up new environments. Maybe you're bringing up a production environment and you don't want to have to rebuild from scratch, but the capability should be there to be able to bring that environment up using some things that some artifacts that you've already been using. So that's the attributes of data ops that one particular advisory services brings in. I think it's missing a little bit though. And from our point of view, the overall data pipeline starts with data ingestion. It also does data quality checks, it does ETL processes, it moves things to a warehouse, to a data lake, and ultimately, it should also include your data analytics platform, because things you modify and change early in that data pipeline impact downstream. And so we think that data ops really is there to seek to reduce the end-to-end cycle time of data analytics, not just from the point of ingestion to the warehouse, but also including the creation and the testing of your data analytics platform, your graphs and your charts and your metrics and so on. So what's the difference between DevOps and DataOps? They're very, very similar. DevOps was really meant to create and accelerate building of applications. And DevOps drove together development and operations. And that is where you see a lot of the benefits and where it helps reduce time for deployment. Where DataOps is really driving together the data owner or the data engineer with the end users, and more collaboration and better collaboration ends up being better results. So that's sort of what we see as the differences, but also the additional attribute that needs to be thought of in data pipelines and data ops. So a little bit about Datagaps, what we do. As data is coming into the enterprise, it doesn't matter what source or where it's coming from. It could be coming from an application. It could be coming through APIs. It could be flat files, JSON, Power BI, and Tableau could be a source of data flowing into your data pipelines. But at that point where data flows in, a lot of times people want to do data profiling to validate and look at the data and really make sure that the data is looking and formed properly. There's about 22 different measures that we take when we do profiling, such as minimum, maximums, distinct counts, all these kinds of things. But we not only profile the data, but we keep track of prior profiles. And if those prior profiles or the new profile is dramatically different, or significantly different than the prior ones, we flag that as a potential anomaly. So we catch things early. The whole philosophy is a shift left philosophy to try to catch things earlier in the cycle before they get too far down the road and before the damage has occurred. So another thing we do, and it's more of a granular thing, is through a low code, no code type implementation, we create or provide you with the ability to create data rules like this column can't be null, this column has to be state, this column can only be this wide. So there's hundreds of these rules that you can create in a low code, no code type of a way. And then we take that a step further. And what we do is we score those rules, and we take those scores and we apply data quality monitoring. And so those scores, start at an element level, they roll up to a table level, then they roll up to the model, maybe to the warehouse or data lake. And, that overall score might be 99%, okay? But the next day or the next day, it might have diminished to 90%. And what you would like to be able to do is, hey, let's find the culprit of why that data quality score has diminished. And we provide a mechanism through data quality monitoring to go down and pinpoint the culprit, the data element or the table that's causing that particular score to diminish. We also provide the capability to independently test your ETL processes. So as data comes in, it runs through the data quality checks and such, ends up in the landing zone. You go through the enrichment and enhancement of that data and the transformation. And then what we do is we independently verify that data that has gone through the ETL process is the expected results. So we compare the files and we determine that yes, they are accurate, or no, these are the errors that you have in that particular instance. And as I'd mentioned, we think the whole end-to-end testing is important, and so we provide the ability to do regression testing, data quality checks, all kinds of tests on your data analytics platform. So say you have Power BI and you have production in a test environment, and you've moved something from test into production, you'd want to verify that it's been moved and that you're getting the same results that you had in test in production. We do that either at a data level, but also we'll do that at a graphical level. So we'll do a graphical comparison between the one in test and the one in production. And if there are any difference in the pixels in the layouts and such, we'll point those types of things out. Now, a key point in this is that if this is being done, you can embed all of these types of tests throughout your CI/CD pipeline. And so as you have code changes, you have the test sitting right next to it and running the test. And again, determining whether the pipeline's running smoothly or not. So we integrate with a number of CI/CD integrations. And we also provide that data observability. So as data is coming into the enterprise, we can take a look at it and not just profile it, but we can say, hey, here are 5 measures that I want to keep track of and I want to learn about as this data continues to come in. So we learn about that through machine learning. And as data continues to come in, if the data gets outside the bounds of what is normal, then we flag that as an anomaly as well. So that data observability and data profiling and rules can be applied not just at the beginning, but anywhere in here. You can do data observability of the data that's being used to render the reports. You can do checks of your data movement as it moves from your curated zone into your data warehouse and then into your data marts. So that's the commercial about Datagaps. And now talk a little bit more about the importance of data testing and automation for CI/CD pipelines. Really, the objective is for faster release cycles and getting more rapid feedback. So if you're doing manual testing, you know, that's costing you a lot more money, but more importantly, it's costing a lot of time. If you embed your ETL processes and then your ETL test and then your data analytics processes and your analytics test side by side, as your pipelines begin to run, you get much quicker feedback, and you can stop the pipeline if a build doesn't function properly. The test catch it, and you go back, fix it, and then rerun that same pipeline. So there's a lot of benefit to being able to not just commit the code and trigger a build and stuff, but also to move your test into that CD pipeline. We integrate again with GitHub, GitLabs, the Azure DevOps, and a variety of things. And this is two-way. We'll move things into those pipelines, and we will check things out of those pipelines, validate things, and so on. The benefits of automated data testing and placing those tests in a CI/CD pipeline really is that early bug detection, that shift left philosophy. So, you know, if you find it a data quality issue in the beginning, it doesn't cause harm. It doesn't cost you as much to fix it there. Certainly improves the quality, reduces your manual effort, but probably the biggest benefit is that it increases the trust in data, and that provides greater user adoption. One of the biggest reasons that people don't adopt or that they abandon a data analytics platform is because they've been burned because the data wasn't accurate, and they made decisions or suggestions based upon poor data. We have a customer that is in asset management. And what they do is they have a lot of data sets that are coming in, trades and securities, and those trades and securities go through multiple iterations and transformations. The problem is they change quite a bit as well. And what they have to do is they have to change that transformation logic. They're worried about unintended changes downstream. And so what they do is they do that end-to-end testing, but they integrate it within their CI/CD pipeline. And what they found is that it helped reduce time to run the manual daily monitoring by 75%. They used to only spot check or check a small number of the records coming in. Now they do 100% validation of all the data, and they do 100% validation of the ETL transformation logic, and they validate that they're getting the expected results. So they've had quite a success with the product and also integrating the product with CI/CD pipelines, and see that as a tremendous benefit. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing, and Shibachi will take over.
So yeah, thanks a lot, Dave. You have given us a great start. And from this point on, we're going to jump into the nitty-gritty details of CI/CD and integrations and branches and management of all of this from a data perspective. And that's something which I really want to stress on throughout this entire webinar. That when we're discussing Git, or when we're discussing these other options and DevOps in general, DevOps was primarily built for a development cycle of software. We, on the other hand, as data engineers, are dealing with a lot more. And when I mean lot more, I do mean lot more in terms of sheer volume. That is the data that we work with. So let's put ourselves into the shoes and look at two scenarios where we try to apply CI/CD, how things work in a typical fashion, and how things work when you have a tool like Datagaps, helping you with the merging of branches, using test cases as code and more and whatnot. So we'll start with this particular deck. This is a basic 2-3 slider deck, and then we will showcase the same in the product ways as well. So let's get started. Of course, the very first aspect of the product is, well, you're going to have different branches within your existing system. Now, typically, a 4-branch system is what people might recommend, but as you might notice, different teams and different projects are going to follow different set of rule sets based on what they're working with. So here I've added an additional UAT branch just for the sake of illustration. Because, well, if you are working with different projects, the code base that you choose or the way you want to integrate CI/CD into your system should work in that particular fashion. Now let's put up a business problem statement for us. Well, we have this set of branches, and what happens, say, once every month or once every 2 months, depending on your project, or once every 2 weeks as well if you're particularly unlucky, is that there are new transformation changes coming in. New requirements come in either in form of regulation changes, either in form of business rule changes, or it's just that you're updating your algorithms, and so the transformations also need to be updated. So new requirements arrive, and typical structure defines that the developer is going to fork from the main branch, go into a specific feature branch, and then he or she is going to create all the updates, necessary transformations needed over there. Now, once he or she does all the necessary transformations, they are going to do some manual testing on top of it. Note, right here itself, there's a big caveat missing. The sheer fact that you're working on a feature branch implies that you might not really have access to the best quality of data that you would like to work with. Of course, access to production data inherently might not be possible as you're working in a development environment, but good quality data might still be missing right there. Moreover, the developer themselves, in most cases, are creating these test cases. They're trying to validate the system based on the output of their transformation data set, and they're trying to validate it based on just these use cases. And so they are trying to understand, well, are there any changes? Is it having any unintended effect? But in most cases, a developer is just going to ensure that the requirements are being worked on correctly and the transformations reflect that. They're not going to look back and see if there were any existing test cases. And if there were, those definitely will be reported. But all of this is happening manually. And that's a key factor here. We are in a CI/CD pipeline, but there's a lot of manual labor involved here, basically. Of course, that's just one part of the story. That's definitely going through a pull request. And once there's some feedback loops associated with it, when the particular, there's some understanding that, okay, this is incorrect. Maybe this is something has to be fixed, so on and so forth. After this feedback loop, there's going to be a merge with the QA branch. Note, before this merge itself, there's going to be a pull request review. And while it's being reviewed, the developer, or in this case, the PR manager, has to go in and check, well, has the code look good? Well, everything looks good based on the basic test cases and the basic code that I see. So that's why we are going to merge it with the QA branch. And at this point on, there needs to be another round of testing. Now, the main reason here is quite straightforward. You would like to ensure that these new changes do not have any kind of associative changes with the other pipelines or other test cases, or more likely, the subsequent data flows and pipelines that you might have. So this is why another set of testing is mandatory in most definitions of ETL pipelines, because just because you add a new transformation does not necessarily mean that the validation done at feature level follows through to the validation at QA level. So here you have another round of tests, and mind you, these are going to be slightly different from the feature branch, because obviously you're going to have a lot more branch-wide testing done. And so there's another round of testing that you have to do. And in this case, you have to ensure that your changes have not inherently caused any unintended consequences or changes to the rest of your pipeline. And once that is done, the cycle kind of repeats itself for the one last time, depending on your use case, for the release branch. Now, of course, if you're working with a release branch, the intended way is to have a fork and then merge it and then run. And once again, another set of validations. And these validations run as a sort of final go through. These are the set of validations that you might have worked upon when creating the initial deployment pipeline, which you defined as a validation pipeline for your ETL system. So this is something that's necessary, because as this is a final round of checks before this thing is being pushed into production. And so once again, another round of manual testing, another round of PR review managers going through the code, going through ensuring that, yes, everything looks good. And they are doing this based on the output of the transformation itself. The data looks more or less good, but hey, if you're working with trillions of records and billions of records, many people can just guess. You can't really go into the exact data set and look at it from a manual perspective. So yeah, there's a lot of manual aspects here, and this is not even considering the UAT branch that most people actually go for. Of course, when we talk about a UAT branch, it's most likely going to be a fork of the release or QA branch, depending on what you're going to work with. And once again, here you're going to have to do a lot of validation. And the worst part here is that in most cases, the QA testers and the people who are working between the feature, the development, and the UAT might not be able to share the test cases they might be working with. And so because they will have to recreate a lot of test cases, because again, they're coming from the QA, from the feature branch, as well as the release branch, there's a lot of excessive test cases and excessive work being done right here. So a lot of work being done on top of it. And now this is, again, once again, a lot of manual labor on top. And so this is something that we'll have to definitely work on, because again, there's a lot of manual aspect in this automated pipeline. And so we'll have to definitely work into it. Now, my next animation, you just saw that, yes, we have the deployment as well. That's the CD aspect of it. And if you're working with the code base, and if you have some deployment options ready, you can easily deploy the code base that you have just updated to the specific dev, QA, and UAT environments correspondingly. Note that in most cases, you're not going to be deploying the test cases, you're only deploying the code. So at this point, you're also losing the test cases that you spend a good amount of time creating. So this is a typical my pipeline. This is a typical CI/CD, and the air quotes are there for a reason as well. When you're working with data, there's a lot of manual processing here. We need to reduce the manual processing, and we need to make it easier for not just a developer, but for the one who is managing these PRs, who is reviewing them, to understand the exact impact of the corresponding changes that we do in an ETL pipeline. So with that, now let's jump into what exactly we recommend from this perspective. Of course, the problem statement will be very similar to what we are working with, but here let's take up 3 important pointers that any true CI/CD webinar cannot be without. The first one is that we need to ensure that we treat our test cases as code, especially when we talk about branches, when we talk about merging them, when we talk about deploying them, and with CI/CD. Test cases need to be treated as code, and this is true even in our data ETL pipelines. The second aspect is we need to automate the process as much as possible. The sheer fact is that the more we automate a CI/CD pipeline, the smoother the DevOps process is. Because if there's a change coming in, the change can be approved in an automated fashion, the report can be generated in an automated fashion, and the changes go in much more quickly. And so you're ready for the next change that's coming in, and you don't really have to have really long periods of time where your release and your development, QA, and all of the branches are in async state. Finally, left shift philosophy is something that Dave has also mentioned in his deck. And what this basically goes into is fail faster. So if there's a problem that's going to come up within your system, you should capture it as soon as possible, because you wouldn't want to capture that issue once it's in production, or once it's towards the end at the final merge, and there you catch something, and now you have to redo the entire system and redo all of the test cases. And one other aspect that the key and I must have noticed is that we have quietly added one key aspect here, which is BI. Now, a lot of ETL pipelines leave BI out of the picture. But to be very honest, BI is one of the critical aspects of any ETL pipeline. The reason we are making all of these data sets, these all architectures and databases, is to ensure that we can use them in a proper business intelligence platform. This could be Power BI, this could be Tableau, Cognos, any other tool that you might be working with. The main gist here is the transformational changes usually have an effect on the BI reports as well. And so validating a corresponding change without validating its impact on your BI platform is still incomplete. And hence, we have added ETL, ELT, and BI code base, because the ETL pipeline is incomplete without the BI code base, even if it's managed by a different team. So now let's jump into the exact same use case and illustrate how our application, or how any application with such functionalities, can really help boost the automation factor and really achieve true CI/CD in an ETL space. So once again, we have the same amount of branches. Requirements are going to come in. There's going to be a fork, and then there's going to be development on a feature branch. Once this feature branch has been developed, now here we see the primary difference coming into picture. You see the application, when you use an application like the DataOps Suite, you have a test suite ready right from the get-go. Now, the various ways this can be interpreted is that a QA tester can receive the requirements at the same time as the developer and create the test cases in parallel. So the developer might not have to work on them, or the QA tester might not have to wait for the developer to work on them as well. Alternatively, this also gets into account that, well, using Gen AI products and all of our other systems that are upcoming, these automated testing systems are going to be generated using our algorithms itself. Based on the changes that you define, the test cases can be generated. Of course, that's coming in our upcoming releases, and it'll take a good amount of time before it's to the accuracy of, well, a well-trained QA tester. But till then, it's of great help for the end user and the QA tester as well. The main gist here is that as soon as a developer has wrapped up his or her changes, the test cases run, and these test cases can be run on any specific branch. And these test cases are transferable. But most importantly, this test case is going to generate a proper report. The report is going to look a little like this. So this is a screenshot from the product itself, and this kind of tells the entire story in a nutshell. Because when you're a manager or anyone who's reviewing a particular PR, you need to have a good amount of information present. Mainly, you need to understand the difference, the impact that this particular change is going to have. Firstly, of course, on the dataset itself, and later on, as I will illustrate, on the subsequent datasets as well. So here we just illustrate that how a particular change, in this case, geography key on DIM customer from AdventureWorks, if you're aware of that, is what our dataset's going to be, their example datasets. And here we just define here, developer has done the following changes, and this is the impact on it, not just on this dataset, but the dataset between landing and curated as well. We get a good understanding of what the exact differences this impact has. We get to see from a profile perspective if there's a volume difference, if there's a profile difference, and you also get a good look at the actual data. And this is the critical factor. Since we are working with ETL pipelines, working on data is very important, and it's paramount. And so the PR review or request report is going to generate everything for you, not just for that specific test case, but for the subsequent ones as well. I will illustrate this once we open this report in the product as well. That's the first part, though. There's, of course, the feedback loop present, but once again, everything is automated. The test cases are present right there, and the test cases are very easy to deploy with anyone, even without any tech-savvy knowledge. So the feedback loop happens, and once the reports are approved and everything is approved by the end user, in this case, the PR manager, we move on to merging them to the QA branch. Once again, the validations are going to happen, but wait, this is much more easier because the QA branch already has its pre-existing set of test cases. Here, if you would like to attach the test case, it's just as simple as importing and exporting them. The application has inherent Git functionality, so you can basically treat the feature branch code. The code changes can be treated the same way you treat your code changes, and merging the feature branch into the QA branch. The test cases will also be merged into the QA branch. That is, if you would like to. Of course, if you're going for a hotfix type of system, the application can handle that as well. In most cases, you will just create a new hotfix branch and go with it. But here, the test cases can also be merged to the QA branch of the test cases. And so testing is automated once again here as well. Now you'll be working with the QA data sets, but your test cases are already present there. And you can rest be assured you're doing a full data validation on your existing test cases, and you're not spending any extra time on all of this. Once again, the reports are generated on the same front. Now, Before our final aspect of the release branch, I did say that the consequences of this corresponding transformation can be done on other data sets as well. So the subsequent data sets, subsequent transformations, and most importantly, the BI reports. So here what we mean by that as well, say this particular DIM customer and geography key change is happening in your landing zone. If you're working with a medallion architecture, assume it's happening in the silver or bronze layer. Well, to see the effect of this corresponding system in your report, it's going to take a good amount of time. But you need to perform them because once you have these records in your golden layer, they're assumed to be perfect. And these golden layer records are going to be then used in your BI report. Assume it's Power BI or Tableau. So at this point, when you're running the validations, once again, be it on QA or in release, depending on if you have BI associations on that particular branch as well, you're going to run another validation. This one is going to include BI validation as well. And the reports is going to look a little like this. So let's spend a bit more time here and illustrate what we're doing here. This is a regression-based report. Regression here is comparing the impact of the corresponding system, not just in terms of data, but also in terms of the report and BI tool in this question. Here we see that our corresponding change has actually, in fact, caught some problems because the geography key, the way it was updated, was incorrect specifically for Europe. And so here we see that there's a change between the Europe datasets, the graphs that we see between 3.1 to 3.3. Of course, this is not just with regards to data. Something which I would like to illustrate in terms of the actual demo is also with regards to the UI elements of pure BI validation as well. So far, we are going with the assumption that, hey, this is all an ETL pipeline. But even if you're a BI manager, and if you're working from the perspective that I manage a complete BI tool, and I need to ensure that my BI reports are not being altered, that is something that we have seen time and time again with a lot of our clients. They have a very similar setup. Let's just go back to our branch. They have a very similar setup, except instead of working on an ETL system, this is their BI system altogether. They change reports, they update reports, they have a lot of transformational changes coming in. And since our applications, they can directly connect to the DAX queries, to the models of the BI tools that you're working with, they can apply a similar type of validation on the models as well as the reports. Regression is just one way. You can compare the reports against the data sets. You can compare reports against other reports. You can apply rules on top of your reports. Something as minute as ensuring a visual does not change its position, or something along the lines of ensuring that the title that you're working with, those fonts remain consistent throughout all of your reports, or that the alignment of the title should not be moved from center to left. Something as simple as that can also be applied within the application. And all of this comes with the aspect that all the test cases that we're discussing are transferable, not just between branches, but between each other test cases as well. One of the famous case studies that we have is of one of our clients using our application to deploy it in one specific environment or branch. And then so they deploy everything in one specific environment or branch. They define it there, and then they deploy it in 6 different branches and 6 different environments that they're working with. So in this basically they save a lot of amount of resources and time because of this, and that's one of the better success stories that we have within our application. Of course, to finish up this particular system, we understand that, well, if you're working with a UAT system, well, you do want to validate it, but here the validation once again is taken care of by the sheer fact that all the test cases that we were working with, you can easily bring them into the UAT branch. You can combine them with the UAT data sets that you're working with, and of course, configure them accordingly. Everything is going to generate its own specific report, but we are really reducing the amount of time it takes to actually get to this point. Because if you're working with a QA tester and you're a developer, and if you're going through all of this, instead of doing it one after the other, or instead of making sure that the other system is ready and trying to transfer your test cases between branches, you can do it inherently with our product. And that's the key aspect here, that all of this is an inherent part of the product system. So just to finish up the system now, just to finish up the example, now we're basically wrapped up most of our validations. Everything has been given a proper report, and all the test cases have been moved to the specific branches. But with regards to CD, not just the code, but those test cases are also going to be saved with the corresponding release. Now, for an easy example here would be, say, 3 months down the line, if you want to ensure that, hey, something happened to the change that we did 3 months ago. So while you can easily go back and see using versioning what exactly happened to that code, you can also see what exactly happened with the test case, which was meant to validate that specific code. So you're going to that level of validation and that level of, say, in this case, housekeeping, basically, of your test case management as well. In most cases, as you might imagine, test cases and validation of data is something of a priority at the very start of your entire project. But as the project moves along, once there are 30, 40 requirements that you have resolved, these things become quite considerably difficult to manage, as we have seen, and I can say from my personal experience as well. And so having a tool which can integrate with your existing code bases and can easily integrate with your existing branch system is, well, quite refreshing, breath of fresh air on this particular front. And the one thing that I want to from this point on start is the differentiation between a typical use case on this and why the suite is much more powerful on this particular front. So I'll quickly move to the other aspect and just illustrate this particular screenshot. Again, I will definitely showcase this in the product as well, but it basically illustrates how our application does have complete kit functionality. But with that, let's jump to the actual product itself at this point and illustrate the different means. So this is the entire product. Of course, our focus today is not on the specifics of the product, but how exactly we work on this. So I'll just give a brief overview of the different validation use cases that we are going with. First of all, you see that, yes, along with the basic dummy webinar container, we do have the production, release, QA, feature branches present right there. I'll be sticking to the production branch. That's where I have most of my use cases. And my use cases are not as simple as just a difference there. My use cases could be something as complex as validation of report against data, as validating a non-SQL to SQL validation, some regression, metadata transformation, and ingestion validation as well. Before I jump into the exact use cases, I'll just illustrate what my pipeline looks like. My data quality pipeline looks a little like this, where at the very first, I validate all the ingested data in my landing zone or at the vendor level. Then in parallel, while I perform some specific transformational validations, I also do a bit of metadata validation. And once everything seems to be good, I can apply a conditional clause before I move into the BI sector, where I validate not just the UI, but the data and also do a bit of regression. So in this particular fashion, we see that the entire pipeline comes together and each of the individual test cases have their own association kit functionality. So if I want to say modify this and pull a very specific version of my metadata validation to a specific branch, it's just as easy as working with my Git systems right there. So if I go back to my test case right there, I can of course go pull a specific branch, commit, or maybe just discard the specific changes that I've worked on so far. So from this point on, I would like to just go into a few specific test cases in the next few minutes and maybe wrap up with that. Of course, the few type of test cases, and again, the reason I'm trying to illustrate this is while in the market, you might find a few set of tools which, basically go to this on a surface level. You do want to ensure that the test cases that you can work with can handle complex logic and complex set of validations. Here we see we are trying to validate this transactional data set across a multitude of dimensions. We're applying a good amount of rules on top of them, which checks not just quantity, but validating the actual amount, validating the aggregate, validating the pattern that we work with. And of course, all of this is on top of typical basic checks of nulls, composite key duplicates, and whatnot. These are simplified examples just for the sake of illustration. In profiling, we're also keeping track of everything ranging from the actual volume of data to the distribution of data, the amount of duplicates we see, the length, the minimum maximum values, everything is being kept track of. If something is amiss, we capture that as an anomaly within the system. And in machine learning code-based anomaly detection, this is something that's tuned up to 11 on this, because we give the end user complete access to the zero code, low code system where you can define your own measures, you can define your own categorizations, and the application finds the exact issues within the data based on the plethora of prediction methods that you define. So just a bit of shadowing on what exactly the product is capable of. This is based on validation, but if you go back to our basic example, this also gets into account of transformational changes, where you can connect to any specific source, apply any type of validation, in this case, any type of processing that you'd like to replicate, and then either save the transformed records directly or save the output of your transformed data sets. Say you want to work with the mismatched and matched records, you can save them as files or as views based on your exact use cases. Here, this is our example in question where geography key has been updated in our target. And to do that, I pick up the source. I reapply the transformation in my SQL. Again, I can use Python, I can use Scala, I can use PySpark, some custom scripts as well. And here, the result is quite straightforward. All the differences are limited to my geography key. And once again, 18 versus 20 tells the entire story. That, well, while the logic has been applied correctly for everything else, the logic between 18 and 20 has been disputed. And I've got this very early within my system. To quickly end this part of the demo, I'll quickly get into regression just to illustrate how easy it is to set up. See, the application just has to define what exact reports you're working with, and it takes care of everything else. Just to make some actual proof on what I was saying, while we are looking at data properly and some string values here as well, as we see with the exact example that I was showcasing, the application is also capable of running pixel-to-pixel validations between your reports. So here in this example, we see, yes, something as minute as the alignment of the title between reports. If it's changed or altered, the application can find that. And of course, you can define rules on this as well. If you want to define a static rule for a position, you can do that. However, if you want to use another report as a reference, or maybe the same report itself as a reference, you can do that as well. This is just one caveat of BI validation. Of course, as I've discussed earlier, we have a lot of different dimensions alongside which we can actually do this. All of this comes with a great plethora of integrations, custom integrations that you can create yourself, and of course, the integrations of CI/CD in this case as well. Here, the example that I can quickly illustrate is DevOps, where the application has integration with the repository, the pipelines, the test plans, and upcoming integration with epics as well. So something as simple as where you get into a board and you have a specific request that's coming up. Say this is the request that I might want to work with, which is updating the logic. It can have an associated change in your ADF. And within the repos, not just your code change, but as you see, the test cases are also present right there. These are the test cases that I was illustrating. So everything is being managed in our production branch. And of course, go to a different branch if I would like to, and then look at the changes correspondingly there as well. But if I want to say merge everything to my existing pipeline, the suite is just one task within the existing pipeline. So here, let's go to one pipeline here, and I'll just illustrate how easy it is to add our particular pipeline, because once again, it's as simple as finding data gaps within the tasks and attaching it within your system. In this way, irrespective of what triggers or other aspects that you've defined within your system, the application just runs within your existing pipelines. And the same is true for test plans as well. After a one-time mapping system, one-time mapping activity where you define what the actual validation of your test case here is corresponding to our suite, as you see, we can define the validation use cases within this particular test plan as well. And this is just one example. We have integrations with other Git functionalities, with other tools that works in DevOps as well. Something as simple as Jenkins also has a great amount of functionality right there. But this is one of the main aspects that I wanted to really dig into. Finally, as I did promise that at the start, I do want to take a look at my reporting section. Here you will see that a key aspect that I wanted to re-emphasize on is that while you can definitely create a bit of validation between the before or after, so basically before or after the change between the data sets, something you also have to definitely look into is the effect that this particular change is going to have on your consecutive flows, or in this case, the flows that follow that corresponding transform data set. Here we see that, yes, transform data sets are going to have an effect on the metadata. It's going to have the effect on BI as well. And something at this point here, as you see, you can, of course, dig deeper and see what the exact effect was in this case. And here, once again, it's the same result, but I do want to illustrate how easy it is just for a PR reviewer to come into this and see the exact changes, the consequences of that changes, the impact that it has throughout your entire pipeline till BI, and then, well, choose to approve it if they have to. So yeah, that's basically it. I do want to leave a good amount of time for questions if we have to. But that basically sums up a good amount of CI/CD that we work with. Once again, the main aspect just to take away points here as well. Fail faster, try to automate everything as much as possible, and try to make sure that your test cases are treated as code. You definitely want to reuse code. Definitely reuse test cases as well. You can clone test cases. You should be able to export test cases. And if you parameterize a single test case, you should be able to replicate that same test case on multiple locations, be it branches, environments, or use cases or projects. So yeah, I guess with that, we can open the floor up for more questions. Yes, I do see there are a couple of questions by Paul. Let me read them out loud. Does an automated testing environment work when there's a significant number of cross-database SQL code? Oh, yes, this is a complicated question to answer indeed, because yes, at the end of the day, if you're working with a cross-database SQL, you need to ensure that your test management tool in the system is also cross-database. Luckily for us, the application does have a great amount of database connectivity. So irrespective of, say, for example, if your development environment uses a bit of Athena for some reason, because that's the easy environment, but your actual deployment might be in Redshift. So as you see, the sources are all present for us, and the same test cases can be applied irrespective of the source changing from Athena to Redshift. And that's because the application is Apache Spark based. For the application, all the data sources are the same. It does not matter whether the data set comes from Athena or the data set comes from Redshift, or it's a CSV file output from, say, an ST location or, say, a blob location. So yes, even if you're working with a cross-database SQL code system that goes onto different databases, you need to ensure that the testing environment can also work agnostically in that particular use case, as Datagaps does. The other question there is, what method do you recommend to keep prod and test data in sync? Well, again, that is dependent on your exact use cases. Depending on the industry, sometimes you can never really have prod and test data in sync. But if you want to make sure they're running them, a good copy, in this case, a good sync in terms of the synthetic data could be a good example there, especially if you want to avoid any kind of compliance issues. So the application does come with the synthetic data generator. I'll quickly change my webinar container to illustrate that. So here you can definitely create synthetic data using the application or use your own systems. But that is the case where you're working with, say, a use case where PII is important and you can't really move data out of production. If you can move data out of production, then a sync is as simple as your code base as well. If you're working with, say, a production environment which pulls data in on every Monday, and if you want to ensure your test cases are also running on that same data set and you have the permissions to do so, something as simple as a sync between the buckets or in the landing zones that you work with should suffice. The test cases and other aspects will be in sync, as our application can do that using a single git commit right there, as you can see there. With regards to git commit, you can do that, the test cases. But with regards to data, if you don't have the compliance, use synthetic data. If you have it, then definitely sync the landing zones itself. All right, we have another question. How do we handle cases where the test data is significantly different between branches? Yes, for example, test data exists in dev, does not exist in QA or staging. Yes, that's exactly the main problem statement that people end up with. That, well, in your test data, you might not really have duplicates on a particular column, but the production data comes in on Monday and, hey, this has duplicates in column. So here, that's one of the main reasons why we had the test data manager come into the picture, because this particular system definitely understands the exact problem statement that you're working with. So here, if I just open one of the existing use cases here, you see the application understands the relations, looks at the data, takes a bit of sample data, and then creates synthetic data for the same, while making sure everything, all the PII information is masked. But here, if your base data, test data has duplicates, the synthetic data will also have duplicates. So with regards to data specifically, this is the main use case. Alternatively, and again, this is just an alternation that one of our clients has done, just one of them have actually done it, where they actually perform their validations on production data using a separate branch. Now, since our test cases can be easily moved between branches, that was not really a concern for them. They had the permission to have separate branches, and they basically ensured that they are not breaking compliance at any point by creating a separate testing branch where they have access to production data, and then they just ran validations based on that. They could not really look at the data, so they relied on the rules and the actual root access of the application to do that. But yeah, that's another way that you can actually do it. But if you're working strictly about data, synthetic data generation is the way to go. And we do have a small product which focuses on this exact problem statement. All right. Is that data quality checks and its observations done by LLM or OpenAI? No, the quality checks are not actually done by OpenAI. So sending data to any third-party application is obviously a big no, irrespective of what industry we are in. So what I mean by the generative AI here is actually a webinar that we have done, I think about last month, where the creation of test cases is automated. So here in data quality, we do have ways to automate the test case generation. So you see this, sorry, let me get to an exact test case here. Here we have wizards to generate the test cases. So here using wizards, the rules that we generate for validation. So here, let's open a few set of rules. So here again, as you see, validation of an email address, validation of ensuring that your income lies in the expected range, making sure duplicates and other aspects are not present for your composite key, all this variety of use cases. The rules are defined by LLMs. And this is again done by an in-house LLM or Azure OpenAI, depending on which model you'd be comfortable with. But at no point we ever send data to any kind of OpenAI system. So that is going to be, that's going to be a huge no-no. And so we actually are making sure that we are using everything that's compliant here. So yes, we don't use OpenAI or LLM to validate the data. We just use the generative AI functionalities to create these rules. So at the end of the day, the QA tester does not have to worry about, what exact rules should I create now that I'm working with, say, a financial data set. And so the OpenAI system is going to give you a nice template to begin with. And then, of course, you can either use that or you can work upon it and improve it based on your expertise. All right. There's one other question. Yeah, has the Git integration been GA'd? We have some versions 22.3. We do not see. Yeah, as you might see here, I'm working with some 24.2 version. But the Git integration again, this has been another update as well. Here you don't see that Git functionality, but it's present in the upcoming version. That's right here. So yeah, you should definitely have access to it once you upgrade, and this upgrade is coming up, I guess, this weekend itself. So in 2 days, by today or tomorrow, most likely Saturday. But yeah, I'll definitely confirm that with my dev team and reach out to you separately on that.
Shpanchi, thank you. And again, we'd like to thank everybody for your attention and reaching out to Datagaps and also attending the webinar. We're happy to do a very specific demo to our clients and prospects on the call. We do, a lot of custom demos. We do a discovery call to find out a little bit more about what requirements are, and then we put together a custom demo. If you're interested in that custom demo, please reach out to us, and we're happy to go through the product, go through the CI/CD integration, really depending upon your requirements. We also tend to be very collaborative, so we like to understand. We like to hear what your ideas are, and sometimes, or oftentimes, that influences our product direction as well. If you are interested in pursuing things further, we do offer a 2-week POC, either on your gear or in our sandbox. And so we run POCs quite often, and we support you during those POCs. We help you get things set up. We do a little bit of training. We have periodic times where we connect and help you over a particular obstacle or see how things are progressing. So again, we like to be very collaborative in our approach. So with that, please let us know if you're interested in taking this further. And again, thank you very much for attending the webinar. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Himanshu. Thanks, everyone, for joining the webinar. If you have further queries, any specific queries, you can contact us at contact@datagaps.com. And if you would like to go for a free trial, that link also has been shared in the chat box. Thank you.